Anything you want to talk
That's
about.
great. Let's
Yeah.
do that. And, let's just kuka
Yeah.
with people out here. And
Yeah.
I appreciate it, This is good. Nearly 30 minutes. Sit down.
What you have on last week?
I was
The
thinking,
Jones Act stuff?
yeah, but I was thinking, okay, here we go, 3. Aloha and welcome to Ehana Kako. Let's work together. That's the name of our program on ThinkTech Hawaii's network, which is broadcast on the internet, on Cablevision radio, and is stored at thinktechhawaii.org. Welcome. My name is Keli'i Akina, president of Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. Today we're going to be interviewing Peter Apo on leadership with Aloha, and I know you're going to enjoy and learn a great deal from my guests. And I'd first just like to say that if you want to tune in on the internet, go to ustream.tv or Spreaker.com, and we're broadcast between 2 and 4 o'clock p.m. Every weekday. Now, to our guest in just a moment. People today know the importance of the first visitors to the islands who became the first residents in these islands. And whether you have been here since your ancestors at least, hundreds of years, or just arrived this past week, there's one thing we all have in common. It's aloha. Aloha is what makes our society work. Aloha is what we come to know most of all as we get to interact with and understand each other. But aloha is also a way of leadership, and my guest today has demonstrated aloha as a way of leadership for his entire career. And so I'm very, very pleased to introduce to you a current trustee of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. He's an educator, he's been involved in government, he's in business, he's a major force in helping the visitor industry understand what aloha is. And so I'd like to welcome to Ehana Kako my friend Peter Apo, Trustee Apo. Aloha.
Aloha mai kaiko.
Oh, it's so good to be sitting down, kuka,
Kuka,
talking with you.
yeah, there you go.
And you're so full of stories and rich history. You've done so much for the people of Hawaii. You and
It's
I.
another way of saying I'm really getting old.
Well, you and I first got to know each other when I was much, much younger, about 30, 35 years ago on the Waianae Coast.
Waianae Coast, right.
That's right. I was out there leading a youth group.
Yes.
And you and Frenchie DeSoto opened her arms.
Yes.
She was a trustee
Yes.
of OHA, and she opened up the community center, and we had meetings.
Yes.
What I always appreciated about you is you had the spirit of a teacher.
Well, actually, at the time, I was teaching.
That's
so,
right.
Yeah, I liked. Those were wonderful days.
Now-
And in a sense, we were both doing the same thing, which we were
That's right.
working with the youth.
Now tell me a little bit about how you moved from your teaching career into public service.
Sure. Just prior to when we met, in 1978, state legislature passed the Constitutional Convention in Hawaii of '78. Created the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And the first election was in 1980. So I did, long story short, I ran for office, and I was fortunate enough to get elected.
Now, what motivated you at that time to move from the comfortable world of being a teacher into the political center? I mean, really to be out there in front of the public.
Sure.
And
Well,
in a brand new capacity.
Yeah. Well, one thing is that I was from a Hawaiian community.
All right.
As you know, Waianae Nanakuli, on the leeward shore of Oahu, was lots of Hawaiians. So I was naturally inclined to want to, if I was going to do community service, to be involved in resolving some of the long-standing issues that Hawaiians were facing. So when the Office of Hawaiian Affairs came up as an opportunity, I decided to pursue it.
Now, you were involved for several years, and then you left the Office of Hawaiian Affairs.
Yeah, well, actually, prior to Office of Hawaiian Affairs, I was on the Waianae Neighborhood Board.
Yes,
Oahu,
that's right.
as you know, is unique in the islands in that Mayor Fossey had created the system of neighborhood boards. So that was my first experience at public office, although it was relatively modest. And the town of Waianae had its own neighborhood board. So.
What did you enjoy most about being on the neighborhood board?
Boy, you talk about getting down in the weeds.
There you go.
I mean, talking about neighborhood issues is about as close to a reality that you can get in terms of lifestyle and the problems that people face living in the neighborhood.
You know, also Henry Kissinger once said, "The smaller the territory, the more powerful the tyrant." I don't know. Did you experience any of that in the neighborhood board?
No, I didn't. Not at that time.
Oh, it was all aloha.
All along, yeah. Oh, funny. No, yeah. But it was, neighborhood board was a really interesting experience. I come from a family of community service. Both my mom and dad spent years. My mom was on the Board of Education, which is an elected position.
All right.
And
At that time, it was an elected position.
Yeah, and she
right.
was on the board at the time. And my dad, of course, was a senior citizen leader back in those. So my family's history is.
And where did you grow up?
I was born on Maui
Oh,
in
okay.
Lahaina, but at a very early age, like at 3 years old, we moved to Honolulu. So I spent my formative years up to the 8th grade in Honolulu proper, down around King and Pikoi. King and Pikoi Street.
In town then.
And then in the 1950, I believe I was in the 8th grade, we moved out to the Waianae area, where land was going relatively inexpensively. And home ownership at the time, that was one of the great opportunities to own a home.
Well, good for you. Now, once you completed your first term, and first terms at OHA,
Yes.
you went on and did some other things.
Yeah, well, because I was part of the first board, there are 9 trustees, and they had to begin a series of staggered terms. So we kind of drew straws, so to speak, and I drew the 2-year straw instead of the 4-year straw. And at the end, nearing the end of the 2 years, there were 2 of us, myself and Malama Solomon, who was on the board from the Big Island. We had kind of decided that if we really wanted to have a more immediate impact on Hawaiian affairs, that the action was all in the state legislature.
I see.
There was a lot of big stuff going on with some federal programs, state programs. So I ran for the House from the Waianae area, and Malama Solomon ran for the Senate from the Big Island.
Right.
And we both were.
And she's still in the legislature.
Yeah. Well, she's on a second term, second life. Yeah. She had left for a time and got appointed in the last election. So we both moved into the legislature, and I spent 14 years there up through '94.
What do you think was the most significant accomplishment of yours during that 14 years in our state legislature?
I'm particularly proud of the fact that I was one of several authors of the Hawaiian immersion, language immersion bills. And that program has gone on to really prove itself. As you're aware, Keli'i, the Hawaiian language was at a point where it was becoming, it was very difficult to find Hawaiian language speakers, and culturally, it's the foundation of Hawaiian culture. So as Hawaiians were struggling to regain their identity, regain their culture after losing much of it, the language seemed to be center to that kind of revival.
Now, we have words like aloha, lokahi, pono, and so forth. And if somebody just Googles, you can get a quickie definition of these words.
Right.
But why is the ability to speak the language important to the culture, both to the Hawaiian and also to the broader culture at large?
Well, Hawaiian language, single words bring with it some depth of meaning and understanding that you don't find in English. For instance, the word pono.
Yes.
The word pono means to be right, to do the right thing. It's different from the way you would say it in English.
Righteous.
Righteous. So pono talks about it's a value that drives very, very deep in terms of what it means. So words like that, words like.
So not to cut you off, but the word pono plays a very important role in our state motto.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So to follow up on what you're saying, if we don't understand the depths of the meaning of pono, we don't even understand the very basic value of our state. Ua mau ke'ea o kamaina ika pono, the life of the land, is perpetuated in pono.
Yes.
And what does that mean to say that the life of the land is perpetuated in pono?
Actually, you're going to be one of the few to know this.
Oh, I'm
because
so privileged.
this is an emerging issue. For those the uninitiated, the state motto is "Ua mau keia o ka aina I ka pono."
Yes.
And it has been all these years translated as meaning the life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. The formal translation is the sovereignty of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. Now that's a huge difference between the two, because now when you say the sovereignty of the land is perpetuated in righteousness, which predated the annexation of Hawaii, it's almost kind of a complaint. But the issue was some Hawaiians feel they lost their sovereignty. So,
and wasn't there another comparable saying that actually mentioned the life? Eola mau.
Eola mau. Yes.
Eola mau keia o ka aina. And wasn't it e na o pio? The
Yes.
life of the land is perpetuated in its youth.
Yes.
So is it the case that maybe they got merged in a sense in the translation?
Maybe. I'm not sure how the original state motto came about. But the translation is, the words are correct. The translation there is in dispute at this point.
Well, before we go to a short break, I just
Yes.
want to wrap up a little bit and come to the present day from your legislative career. You've also been involved in business. You've also
Yes.
been involved in the visitor industry.
Yes.
You tell us a little bit about that and the very interesting role you've played.
Long story short, after I left the legislature, I went to work in the city county of Honolulu under Mayor Harris, and became the director of Waikiki Development.
Yes.
And I didn't know a lot about tourism at the time, but boy, that was sure a quick ramp up, and I learned a lot.
And what were the years of that?
This was 94, 6, around 1997 to around 2001.
Yes.
And those years, as I got involved and understood the business model of tourism, I became very interested in a Hawaiian perspective and the demand for a Hawaiian sense of place consultation. So I started a consulting company that worked with developers and of hotels, retail centers, and how to incorporate a Hawaiian sense of place in terms of architectural design, telling a story, landscaping, program services. And I'm still doing that.
Has there been a large market, a responsive market to consultation for Hawaii sense of place?
I've been real busy. The market today, the last 10 years, there's been a rising consciousness on the part of developers to want to deliberately be a little bit more thoughtful in their planning, early planning, on trying to incorporate a Hawaiian sense of place. I think they're placing more value on the culture. And what I mean by that, prior to that, it's not that they didn't think of Hawaiian sense of place, but they didn't come at it early enough so that once all the designs were done, then they would think about culture. And then so culture would become kind of a potted plant, and you moved one here, you moved one there. But that has changed quite a bit since then. So as that change came about, opportunities for people like me to be in business.
So it's not just like a commercialized feng shui.
Exactly.
There are very deep values, I would imagine, that you try to embed in the architecture, the culture, the landscaping, and so forth.
And essentially, it's about storytelling,
Wonderful.
So you tell stories, and the way you tell stories, you can tell stories through the design of buildings, through landscaping, through programs, through services. And so it's as simple as that.
And I would imagine also bringing in the historical place. That
history is always important.
The modern building supersedes in many
and
ways.
celebrating the place, the site on which you're located is always important.
So then to come full circle to the present time,
Yes.
you went back and ran again for the Office of Hawaiian Affairs Trustee.
Yes.
And what motivated you to get back into the office?
I I guess I'm just crazy. As you know, the history of the office, sometimes it's been a little contentious in terms of the governance of the office. Everyone there is, of course, always means the best, means well, but then there had been a few. So I had to really think about it if I wanted to actually, get involved, and I decided, I think at this stage of my life, I felt that I had something to contribute. And so I can't think of a better thing to be doing at this point in my life than trying to make a contribution to the betterment of conditions of Native Hawaiians. And OHA is at the forefront, of responsibility, and Kuleana Hawaiians call it, of trying to make things happen.
Well, that's a wonderful word as well, and perhaps we'll talk about it, because when we come back from our very quick break, we're going to talk a little bit more with Trustee Peter Apo about leading with Aloha, something that he's done for many, many years, and something that we can all learn a great deal about. My name's Keli'i Akina, and you're watching a Hana Kako. Let's work together on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We'll be right back after this short break. Aloha. Aloha. Welcome back to a Hana Kako. Let's work together on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. My name is Keli'i Akina, president of Grassroot Institute. We're having a delightful conversation today on leadership with Aloha with my guest, trustee of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, Peter Apo. Well, Peter, we're back again on the second segment, and what I wanted to talk a little bit about with you here is leadership with Aloha and what that means. And you said something earlier that when we establish a sense of place and refer to the sense of place in architecture or in our homes or in decorating, there are stories that are included. Would you happen to have a story that would bring to mind a sense of place for anywhere or any project you've worked on, and something that can help us get a better idea of that?
Well, why don't we start with defining aloha?
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
very
sure.
good.
Okay, so the word aloha it's actually two words. The first part of the word alo, alo, and then the ha, the ha. So alo refers to being in one's presence,
Right.
and literally being kind of in their face. So very up close, intimate, and personal.
And that's how Hawaiians greeted one another.
Yes.
Say goodbye.
Yeah, they would touch noses.
That's right, absolutely.
The ha, it means breath, as in breath of life.
That's right.
So when you say aloha, even though you may not physically act it out like the Hawaiians of the past done, you are saying to the other person, I'm sharing my breath of life. We are exchanging
Absolutely.
breath of life. Now,
And
what does that mean?
But that's actually very scientific too, because in quantum physics today, we're constantly interchanging molecules.
There you go.
So whenever we're breathing each other's breath, we're becoming each other.
There you go.
But tell us what it
Yes.
means from the Hawaiian culture.
Okay, the first thing it means is it's an unconditional extension of love, friendship, and trust. it is also accepting responsibility for the receiver of the law, me to you or you to me, of accepting responsibility for your safety, for your welfare. And so when you exchange aloha, we are in fact taking responsibility for each other and becoming unified in a sense of wanting to move forward together as one unit, so to speak. So it's a very deep thing. Now, a lot of people, at the shallowest level of aloha, of course, it means hello and it means goodbye. But essentially, when you use aloha, like in the case of tourism and working with a developer, you hope that the developer comes with some sense of aloha and that they want to help them celebrate the culture in ways that are what I call pono, that are righteous. And the context of that is that, after about 80 years of being in the tourism business in Hawaii, the culture has more often than not been misappropriated and presented Hawaiians in a ways that did not hold a lot of dignity and honor with it.
This is a very interesting thing to be talking about in terms of the word aloha, as you've explained it. That the second part, oha, is breath,
Yes.
or ha is breath,
Yes.
and when we talk about perhaps the spirit of aloha not being perpetuated, sometimes there's some misunderstanding. Isn't the word that we use for newcomer, the malahini who comes, derived from the fact that Hawaiians at first noticed that there were some people who kept themselves distant, who didn't want to exchange the breath, it seemed, and so they were called ha breath not, ha ole or
yes.
haole.
Yeah, actually, at the basic meaning simply means that you are not Hawaiian, but there was no negative
Right.
intent in the word. It's just saying I'm Hawaiian and you're not Hawaiian.
Because the Hawaiians were welcoming anyone who wasn't yet a Hawaiian.
Yes, but over the years it changed a little bit in that there was newcomers would come, and then some of them would do some things that were not so pono. So then, in thinking through the relationship now, some Hawaiians would use the word haole, not of the same breath, in kind of a negative manner.
Yes.
And I think that still kind of persists today. So now today, when you say the word haole, the context is important. It can be a friendly word, like it's hey haole, how are you?
Yeah.
That's good. We're not of the same breath, but we are. On the other hand, if it's used negative, we say, oh, that haole, look what that haole did. So it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition of the same word in different contexts, means something totally different.
And in a sense, too, it's a very powerful concept that the word aloha unites
Yes.
Hawaiian and haole
Yes.
together with that one word ha.
Right.
And going back to what we were talking about before, tell us how aloha factors into leadership, whether someone is a manager, a corporate head, a developer, a luna, a boss, or a mother, a father. How does aloha translate into leadership?
It translates in the sense that it's a value. It contains an entire value system. Aloha operates sort of like an umbrella word under which falls a whole range of Hawaiian values. It's kind of the overarching principle, and it means that whatever you are doing in your life, you need to always bring aloha to the table, so that even if there is conflict, if there is people you don't disagree with, there's nothing wrong with disagreeing with the person or being of a different persuasion, whether it's religion. But always, you have to come with aloha. So anger, it eliminates anger. Not that you shouldn't feel bad about certain things, but you don't express it that way. You don't, you always call it nahe nahe. Just stay calm, stay cool.
I like the way that you expressed that aloha is the banner or the umbrella over many other values.
Yes.
So, for example, take one value called victory. Imua,
Sure.
imua, alana kila, forward to victory. if you just take that value by itself, it can be devastating.
Yes.
But I remember somebody who demonstrates what you just described, that victory always had aloha over it, Dukanamoku.
Oh yeah.
In the
Oh,
Olympics.
you just meant that he was Mr. Aloha.
Yes,
you know.
and he, at one point, knowing he would win his race, slowed down so the second place would not be embarrassed. And I'm thinking, if all you had was victory, victory, nothing but victory,
Yeah.
you wouldn't do that.
Right.
But that victory, as you pointed out, is one of the values, of the many values that have to be interpreted back to aloha.
Yeah, aloha under that word. In this case, it embraced humility. You know.
And so going back to my question about leadership, what are
Mm-hmm.
some of the ways we can see leadership operating with
Well,
aloha?
one of the subsets of aloha is a word called laulima.
Laulima.
Laulima. Now, that's an organizational concept. Lau means, lau refers to like a rope or cordage, right? And a cordage that was used to hukilau, that is, a number of people would form a semicircle along a shoreline, and each would have their hands on the lau. Lima is hand. So lau lima means many hands working together. Now, under the banner of aloha, it's talking about many hands working together in a spirit of cooperation. The notion is that you're only as strong as your weakest link, so to speak, or the organization is only as good as its lowest unit of production. That's all part of this aloha definition, as expressed through the word laulima. So when you go to organize departments, too many times in modern day corporate organizations, especially, left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. Departments don't really communicate too well with each other, so you have a little bit of dysfunction. Laulima talks about everyone has to be horizontally aligned and walk in lockstep, like a linking of arms. So that concept falls under that.
And that also speaks to the kinds of organizing that should be done in the corporate world.
Mm-hmm.
We need to pay attention to the individual as opposed to merely use them. And we have to create this unity,
Yes.
this cooperation, this participation. I would think also that for the leader, it would mean that we cannot think of ourselves as leaders as being above everyone. We have to be part of a process of sharing with one another. So this is very good.
That's
human
actually
resources.
in Laulima, because the other thing Laulima says is leave your title at the door.
There you go.
Right? It doesn't matter, whether the president of the company or if it's a hotel, you're a dishwasher. Every job is as important as another job, and if one person is not performing their job, it affects what everybody else does.
So then the definition of leadership is not about who has a title or who has a position, but rather who has the ability to create and encourage this process
Yes.
of laulima.
Yes.
And so someone may actually be the leader who has no title.
Yes.
And I think I've seen a lot of workplaces where that's the case. Sometimes the leader with the title is the worst part of the process. And somebody out there with no title, whether it's the secretary or whether it's the foreman or whatever, is saying,
No,
yeah, let's laulima.
That is true more times than we want to believe. It's sort of in politics, in how community leadership within a community. You have your elected officials, and then you have your what I call them block leaders. People who don't have a title, who are from a neighborhood that others just naturally follow. And when in times of trouble, these are the ones that stand up to be counted and lead, and et cetera. So yeah, it's.
Well, how did this factor into some of the kinds of leadership we see historically in the development of the Hawaiian people, particularly back in the 18th century or so, when there was a very well-developed caste system where if you were a li'i, you were on the top, but if you were a commoner, you were maka'ainana, you were on the bottom, you even had the outcast. I would imagine that in many ways that kind of structure might have been working against the concept of aloha, and it would work better or worse depending upon who the leader is. What are your
Well, what's
thoughts about
happened
that?
over the years is that as Hawaii became more assimilated into 21st century and into modern governmental structure, it began to flatten the pyramid and in more of shared responsibility. Under the old ali'i system, or the kingdom system, the lines of authority were were definitively separated. And it was not a democracy in the sense that when the ali'i moi, the king or the queen, issued an edict or wanted something done a certain way, it just was. You didn't have an opportunity to question that. Now, this is where the idea of aloha, if that leader had some aloha, then even though they were vested with the power to do whatever they wanted to do, they would be sensitive enough to know that what would make them a better leader is if they could do it with the emotional support and genuine feeling on the part of the subjects to want to serve, to want to serve the king, and you do it by kindliness. Now, it's interesting that in Hawaiian communities in pre-contact ancient days, were before Hawaii was a kingdom, was a system of chiefs.
Yes.
And normally every valley had its own chief. Now, the one undisputable law is that if you were unhappy with the chief under which you lived, you could move. They could not prevent you from turning your loyalty to another
Interesting.
chief. That was kind of the backup system that, hey, chief, if you abuse your people too much, you're going to end up
You're gonna lose them in that case.
without the
Well, how
farmers
about
in the
that?
field, right?
We're going to be back in just a moment with Trustee of Office of Hawaiian Affairs, Peter Apo. You're watching E Hana Kako. Let's work together on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina. Aloha.
I got to come in and take...
Aloha and welcome back to E Hana Kako. Let's work together on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, President of Grassroot Institute. My guest is Peter Apo, Trustee of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And we're talking about leadership with Aloha, a discussion we're going to get right back to in a moment. But first, we need a word from our sponsor, Jay Fidel. Jay, are you there? Out in cyberspace somewhere. I love that laugh.
You guys are great. Thank you for letting me have a minute here.
Sure.
So we're talking about drones today, Keli'i. Peter, we're talking about the drones program. We call it Drones Over Hawaii. It'll be on Thursday this week, the 25th. It'll start at 11:30, go to 1:30 at the Plaza Club. The title is Drones Over Hawaii and What We Can Do About It. An expert panel on the use and development of drones, the technology involved in design and manufacture of drones, the law, the ethics, the military strategy relating to their deployment, the business of building and selling them, the legislative issues of concern, and the foreign policy implications of using them.
Sure.
So we got six speakers, moderated by Dean Peter Crouch, who is the Dean of the College of Engineering at UH Manoa. And our six speakers are Carl Baker, Pacific Forum on Foreign Policy and Drones; Sung Choi, who is the Assistant Dean at the College of Engineering on the technology of drones. There's many kinds of them, both civilian and military, and in each category, many different kinds. There's Ted Ralston. He's an ex-Boeing aerospace industry expert. Now he consults in the area. Avi Soifer, the Dean of the UH Law School, William S. Richardson School of Law, to talk about the law and the constitutional considerations, and also the morality and the ethics about using drones. Gene Ward, Representative Gene Ward, a representative in the Hawaii State Legislature and the vice chair of the Committee on Technology in the House, who is a big proponent of technology in Hawaii and the incentives involving the technology industry. Major General Darrell Wong, who's the Adjutant General of Hawaii, and he's going to talk about the military implications. So this is a program on July 25th at Plaza Club here at 900 4th Street Mall, right above the ThinkTech studio. Program starts at noon. If you want to sign up, it's at hvca.org. And when I was on Howard Dykes this morning, he said this sounded like the most interesting program we have ever done. How about that?
Well, Jay, it's absolutely interesting. But, what's a curiosity is why you call them drones. Why not call them just unmanned agricultural support vehicles?
Actually, the term is truly
unmanned. AEIOU.
UAV. That's
right.
Unmanned Aeronautic Vehicles. Yeah.
And the reason I mention that is that while the exotic use of them may evoke military applications, probably the majority use of them, as people envision the economy of Hawaii, is to support our agriculture, oceanographic, and other systems in very civilian endeavors. Wouldn't you say that too?
Yes, absolutely. Many, many different things go into that technology, and many uses are possible.
Great. I congratulate you, Jay, on assembling such a blue chip panel for the drone program, and wish you the greatest success.
Thank you so much, Keli'i. Now back to you for the show, eh?
Yes. So now we return to E Hana Kako, and we talk about drones with Aloha. And that would be an interesting application. Here there's going to be a panel on unmanned aerial vehicles, and there are all kinds of fears about it.
Sure.
If you were governor, and this industry was starting to grow up in Hawaii, and it could bring in a significant amount, $500 million and so forth, and local manufacturing, and its majority use was for agriculture, oceanography, and so forth. And OHA has a lot of lands as well. How would you cast this for the public in light of the Aloha spirit?
This is, I have a philosophy about this kind of public policy.
Sure.
And it's the same way I feel about GMO, the
Sure.
big, and that
Genetically
is
modified
genetically modified organisms. It's situation specific. In the case of GMO, it can be good or bad depending on the situation and the specific species that you're dealing with. Same with the drones. Drones can be incredibly beneficial. I mean, unmanned space flight is the way to go and save lives, right? And whatever. But if the drones are being used for surveillance and intruding on people's personal freedom, then there's a problem there. So it depends on how they're being used.
Sure. So in a broader sense too, then, how do we bring Aloha into public policy? Because public policy frequently has individuals who take one position, other individuals who take the opposite position. They aim at each other, and pretty much the one who remains standing and gets the most money, gets the most votes, is the one that prevails.
The irony
So-
in your question, Keli'i, is that aloha is actually codified in the Hawaiian Affairs statute.
Now that's an incredible fact that most people don't know.
So now
It's
maybe
part of
we gotta
law.
get the
It's actually
legislators
law.
to read it.
That's right. What are some of the things it says in the statutes about aloha, the aloha spirit?
It provides a definition. I don't recall specifically what the language is, but it does express that government should operate on the basis of aloha.
And that's a very interesting thing, that to practice the aloha spirit is actually a law in the state of Hawaii.
Yes.
And at the very least, those who are in lawmaking
Yes.
need to do their very best.
And I think the application of aloha in terms of lawmaking and specific to public policy bodies, is to administer and to practice it without bringing in the kind of vitriol that we see today about the just plain mean-spirited kind of legislating where people are just on each other's backs. I mean, some of it gets really pretty ugly. So again, sometimes I long for some of the old days where you had, in the case of partisan politics, there was a time when you had in the Congress people from both sides of the aisle who had aloha.
Yes.
And probably one of the most celebrated cases was Dan Inouye and
Dan
Ted
Akaka.
Stevens.
Oh yes, Ted Stevens.
And Ted Stevens,
right.
a diehard Republican, Dan Akaka, diehard Democrat, but somehow they had this tremendous respect for each other, and worked on many, many projects to the benefit of both Hawaii and Alaska, and that is aloha to me. That's an acting out of aloha in public policy making that there's too little of today.
Well, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because that certainly is the case. When politics becomes divisive, it ceases to construct. And it doesn't mean we have to agree on everything
Yes.
together, but it does mean that we minimize the disagreement. And when we have it, there's a process the Hawaiians had I'd like you to talk a little bit about, because I think that if we can practice this with each other, we can move forward, and that's part of the aloha spirit.
Yes.
Ho'oponopono.
Yes.
Ho'oponopono, to make, you used the word pono before, to make things right.
To make things right.
The right way.
Ho'oponopono, right, to make things right. Ho'oponopono was a process of sitting down with the parties who were in conflict with each other, and it was more of something that was executed by families. So you had kind of a leadership structure in the deliberation, which today is not quite as, it's not practiced as quite as stringent as that. But the whole notion of sitting people down who go in with, where both parties, the disagreeing parties, come in with the intent of listening more than they talk, of wanting to actually to settle the differences and to come out of it, with a resolution, and to bring closure. That's important, to bring closure to whatever feelings that were there that were negative prior to going into the Ho'oponopono. When you come out, whatever happened, if Ho'oponopono was successful, you and I would shake hands and genuinely embrace each other, and whatever we had in area is pau.
And isn't it sadly the case that in political conflict, people don't bring closure? They carry with them those feelings, the
Yes.
resentments for years, decades, and then retaliate
They're
sometimes
like
when you
keeping
don't
score,
realize.
right?
That's
Keeping
right.
score of how many times you got hit, and then you got to hit the other guy back. Then.
So really, the practice of Ho'oponopono would be something that we can take from the Hawaiian culture
Yes.
and apply very directly to our political situation, our
Oh,
business
and
situation.
in Ho'oponopono, a big thing was a sincere apology from both parties, because
Yes.
no one's ever completely right. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? The admission and the recognition that no one is ever completely right, therefore no one is ever completely wrong.
Correct.
And so we've got to have a little bit of give.
Yeah. So apologies go both ways, and then so when there is a reconciliation, now and you leave all the pain behind you, and you
Yes.
move forward in a whole new, brand new start.
Well, that's a wonderful concept, and wouldn't it be great to see that practiced in our legislature, our city council, and even in our families every day? Leadership with aloha. I'm talking with Trustee of Office of Hawaiian Affairs, Peter Apo, and we're discussing leadership with aloha. You're watching a Hana Kako. Let's work together on the ThinkTech Broadcast Network. My name's Keli'i Akina, President of Grassroots Institute. We'll be right back after this. Aloha and welcome back to Ehana Kako. Let's work together on the ThinkTech Broadcast Network. We're delighted today to be talking about leadership with Aloha with OHA Trustee Peter Apo. And I want you to know that probably more than at any other time in history, we need Aloha. We need Aloha in every aspect of our society here in Hawaii and across the world. Frankly, Peter, I think that one of the greatest problems that we face today is the attack upon aloha, or the demise of aloha in the very land that it is supposed to represent it. And sometimes those of us of Hawaiian blood are not always known for our aloha for everyone else and our aloha even for each other. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, I tell you, my observation is early on, as we became populated through the arrival of immigrant populations, through the plantation area especially, it was actually pretty remarkable that whether they were Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, Pacific Islander, Korean, they all in some way picked up this concept of aloha.
Right, and it's also
and they didn't give up their culture.
Right.
It wasn't about proselytizing their culture, but they added aloha and the feeling and this thing about unconditional extension of, and in ways that allowed them to preserve the dignity and the honor of who they were and the countries they came from. And so there's this blending and this wonderful melting pot. Now, there was a whole societal condition that was created up until tourism began to really hit its stride, and then we began to attract a lot of people who came to Hawaii in and out, and so the dynamics of Hawaii and its population, the demographics began to change. And you began to have people who didn't spend enough time here or did not give enough, I guess, thought to what it meant to become a member of Hawaii society.
Yes.
And so there started to become, this little tattering of the tapestry in us being whole. I think we're still in really good shape because I think the vast majority of people, even newcomers, are still on the Aloha page. Now, central to all of this, though, I think one challenge that we have is Hawaiians are still seeking reconciliation based on how Hawaii became part of the United States through annexation, through what Hawaiians are claiming to be an illegal
That's
overthrow
right.
of the Queen.
And-
And that reconciliation process has been very long. So there's kind of an abiding tension, but the tension between Hawaiians and some of the non-Hawaiian population. But the tension is not personal. It's more institutional and collective.
So, Peter, how then do we move forward with the Aloha spirit? I know we don't have time
Yeah.
in today's program to go into all the,
In a
the
nutshell,
particular issues.
in
but-
a nutshell, one, Hawaiians need to communicate a lot better in terms of where they're going. And I think non-Hawaiians need to make more of an effort to pay a little bit of attention. There is no way that Hawaiians will ever change their personality, their persona, their DNA as the people of Aloha. So while I cannot say where they're going in terms of the political nation building, etc., I know that they will never leave their neighbors and friends behind. That it will be an inclusive model, and it will be fair, and they will continue to be concerned about prosperity for everyone.
Well, Peter, that sounds as though there's a very important center place where values meet. We
Yes.
talk about aloha, but there are also Christian values.
Absolutely.
For many. There are
Yes.
also values that come from people who have other religions.
Yes.
There are also the values of the American tradition. When
Yes.
we look at the recognition of the rights of the individual in the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights, and we look at the Constitution itself, which maintains a balance of power, as you were speaking,
Yes.
not just having a head person, but spreading it out. So I'm very hopeful, and I hope you are, that the kind of teaching you're bringing about aloha can actually help the very process of the sides to
and
reconcile.
with respect to Hawaiians, the fact is, after all these years, Hawaiians are not just Hawaiian. Most of us, I'm Hawaiian Chinese and a little bit of Spanish. And there's some,
Hola.
I'm parts of me are Haole, So,
And isn't that so true, that the vast majority of us are actually the world, really. The world come to Hawaii.
I believe we are
That's
that.
right.
Yeah, I believe we are that tapestry. We are what the world is trying to become.
And you knew my kumuhula Nona Beamer, such a
Yes.
beautiful lady.
Yes.
And she took the Oli Aloha, the Aloha chant in her family, and saw the definition of Hawaiians from that. That is,
Now
we are
there
those-
was a woman
Right.
of Aloha.
And she
Big
said,
time.
we are those who have come from afar. And wouldn't you say everyone, whether it was 500 years ago or 5 days ago, has come from afar to be here?
Yes.
I know you and I had a wonderful lunch, and maybe we can close on this. In the broadest sense, who is Hawaiian? Who is Hawaiian?
Well, Hawaii loa kuli ke kako, one Hawaii, all Hawaii stand together.
Aloha. That's
Aloha.
a beautiful, beautiful word. And I thank you so much. That unity is really the foundation by which we can move forward, whether we're Hawaiians by blood or Hawaiians at heart.
Yes.
My guest today has been Trustee of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, Peter Apo, a man who has lived, shown, and stands for aloha. And I'm so honored to be able to chat with him, whom I consider my kupuna, or my elder. I don't mean to refer to his age, but to his good looks and his wisdom. But it has been a delight. We are on a Hanakako, part of the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. My gratitude goes to Jay Fidel for putting the network together, and all of the volunteers, unless he's paying them, who are involved in filming or managing the studio and so forth. You're doing a great job. Take a look at ustream.tv and Spreaker.com, 2 to 4 p.m. every weekday, and go to the website thinktechhawaii.org. My name is Keli'i Akina, president of Grassroot Institute of Hawaii. We're delighted to be talking today about Aloha, about leadership with Aloha. And so, Peter, again, much aloha to you.
Thank you.
And I wish all of you a wonderful aloha.